This is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft chocolate, craft beer, and other artisan drinks. My name is David Nilsen. I'm a professional drinks writer, an advanced cicerone, the author of Pairing Beer and Chocolate, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or on annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Hey everyone, welcome to the final episode of Bean to Barstool for 2025. It is mid-December. As I record this, I just wrapped up on my last event of the year. I just filed my last article that I absolutely had to finish in 2025. Still got several more, of course, that I'll be chipping away at in the coming weeks, but things are winding down and I am coasting toward the end of the year. It is cold here in Ohio. We've had a cold December. We got a good snow about a week and a half ago, and it has stuck around. We've still got snow on the ground. I love this time of year. It's not just the holidays. I love the wildness of the cold and the dark and being confronted by the physicality of our existence in a way that maybe we aren't in some of the more temperate months. And perhaps ironically with that, the physicality of that cold and dark, it also feels like the veil is just a little thinner this time of year between us and whatever's out there between us and each other. There's no guest for this episode. I'm going to look back at 2025, look at some of the things that went well and that I'm happy with, some of the things that didn't, and some of the things that were difficult. Look ahead at some things for 2026. I'm going to go through some of my favorite beer experiences from the year, my favorite chocolate bars from the year. Looking back at 2025, at the end of every year, usually in the week between Christmas and New Year, but right around in here, I always take some time to do some intentional reflecting and brainstorming and planning, looking ahead at ideas for the next year, ranging from the professional and practical to the personal and philosophical. One of the things, I'm still going to sit down and do this extensively in the coming weeks, but one thing that I've noticed already from the last year is that I have gotten away from tasting as a practice. I have not done much sitting down and intentionally tasting chocolate or beer or anything else for its own sake. I do stuff for review. I do stuff for professional development and training, but I haven't set aside as much time as I have in years past to just see what the tasting experience can show me. And I often write it down in my planner each week in the margins of like, hey, you should do a tasting sometime this week. And what I know about myself by now after years of freelancing is that if I don't schedule the time for something, it will get elbowed out by other things. So my plan for 2026 is to start setting aside intentional time each week to do a tasting, not for a specific purpose, not for an article or to prepare for an event or to review a product, but for me and to see what can come out of that. It has been a difficult year, and you don't need me to tell you that. The political situation here in the U.S. is a disaster. The worst possible people seem to be trying to drive us off of a cliff. And for me personally, professionally, it has been hard to care about hop varietals and cacao percentages when people are getting snatched off the street and rights are getting stripped away and we hardly recognize where we're living. And the masks of some of the worst people out there seem to be coming off, and it's hard to see hope on the horizon, and that has made it difficult to care about writing about leisure activities and travel and beer and food and drink and chocolate, even though I love those things and those things give me joy. It's been hard to care. And toward the end of the spring and in the months after the inauguration, as just one thing after another was coming, it kind of coincided with, or maybe kicked off, a long simmering burnout. I did not do much professional work across the summer. I had some articles that I was working on, but largely I just gave myself the space to rest, largely because I couldn't really focus on much. And I know there's a lot of privilege in financially being able to do that, but it took several months before I kind of got back into the swing of things. And beyond just the difficulty of life in America right now, it is hard out there for businesses. You guys know this, those of you who are involved in craft chocolate or craft beer, in hospitality of any kind. The tariffs are a disaster. Ingredients are more expensive. Customers have less money to spend. And customers have less emotional and mental energy to spend. Anybody who cares about the world we're living in and cares about the people around us is exhausted. And when you don't have emotional and mental energy to devote to luxury and leisure things like craft chocolate and craft beer and artisan beverages and everything, it's hard to care about those stories. It's hard to get excited about new products. And for customers, even for me as a writer, it is harder to care. And that makes it harder for the makers and the brewers and everyone else, not just for obvious financial reasons, but also because there is less enthusiasm directed toward you. And your creativity comes from a place of fullness and from joy, and you're dealing with the same kind of struggles that everyone else is. It's been hard, and I don't know where hope comes on the horizon right now. One thing that I found this year that did provide some infusions of energy and enthusiasm for me in the fall was some travel that I was able to do professionally, and just being around other people who are certainly troubled by the same things I am troubled by, but also enjoy these same things that I enjoy, and getting to devote a few days to just kind of geeking out about that stuff, whether it is beer judging. I traveled in Canada and Mexico for judging some beer competitions. I was at the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival in November, being around other chocolate makers and educators. And in addition to just kind of being fun and being able to take a couple days off and just focus on these things that I enjoy, was also a reminder that this stuff does matter. We aren't just indulging ourselves by tasting good things and buying these things. These things tell stories, and they are connections to each other, connections to other places. There are people out there doing cool things, and it was a good reminder that, especially as a freelancer, I'm sitting at my desk all day, all week, alone for the most part, even though I'm, doing interviews and things, and it can be easy to just get in my head and feel like I'm shouting into a void. Even doing this podcast can feel like I'm just talking into a microphone and there is no one listening. And, several people at the Craft Chocolate Festival last month mentioned being to Barstool and how much they enjoyed it. And it was just a really nice reminder that there are people who care about what I'm doing, and getting to see them do cool things, it helps. And it's a good reminder that when we enjoy something, whether it's a craft chocolate bar, a beer, a book, an article, a podcast episode, let the creator know. It feels like such a small thing, but reaching out and just saying, hey, I really enjoyed this thing that you put time and energy into, can go a long way. We all can be so isolated, and I know I especially can feel like I am doing this by myself, and it means a lot to hear from people that they enjoy what you're doing and that what you're doing matters. The last event I did for the year was a beer education class at a local public library. And I've been doing a education series at this library for 8 years now. This was the end of our 8th year doing it. A lot of the folks who attend it have been coming from the beginning, but we also get a regular influx of newcomers. And we've been for 8 years now walking through different style groups and brewing processes and ingredients and pairings and just the whole gamut of beer education. We have, of course, across that whole time been talking about how to taste beer. We taste beer in every class, and from the very first one, we've talked about the process for doing that and how calling it a tasting is really inaccurate because we actually engage all of our senses, and we engage those each time that we do this tasting. But one thing that I've been wanting to do for a really long time is devote a single class to a deeper experience of tasting, not just a how to taste, but a why to taste. And just taking a few beers and stripping away the need for information around that and to have a specific goal in mind and to just think about like not just the process of tasting, but the purpose of it. Why do we set aside time to do this? And it went so well. And I was so grateful to the folks who attended. We tasted 3 beers. Normally in a standard class, we're doing 4 or 5. We're moving kind of quickly because the point of this is to learn things. In this case, we slowed down quite a bit. And we did something we don't normally do. We did a blind tasting for all 3. So I didn't tell them what any of the beers were until we were done tasting. And we used that as a way to look at how having that information in advance can influence so much of what we taste, not just knowing the ingredients or the styles, but seeing the labels, hearing the name of the brewery, hearing any of the story around it. Those things can influence us. And I think that's okay because I don't think what's in the glass is the only thing that matters. I think everything around that, the brewery story and the artwork and everything else is a piece of enjoying that beer. And, with minor adjustments, the same thing is true for any other type of artisan food and drink, craft chocolate included. But being able to just strip that away for a moment and just say, what are my senses telling me, is such a fun exercise. We talked about how color influences perception. We tasted a coffee beer that was as pale as can be, and we typically expect coffee beers to be dark. And if we were to assign color to the aroma of coffee, it would be probably the color of coffee. And so we were talking about how visual things influence us. We talked about how the name of a brewery and the reputation of it can lead us to like or dislike a beer more than we might just based purely on the flavors we're experiencing. We talked about how things like knowing how long a beer aged, if it's barrel aged, can carry a level of prestige that makes us want to like something more. And we just, all kinds of interesting things, the associations we have with different colors, the way that particular aromas influence our perception of sweetness, even though we cannot smell our basic taste, sweetness included. We talked about the fallibility of our memories in the tasting experience. With doing a lot of beer judging, one mistake that beginning beer judges sometimes make is trying to guess what a beer is that they're judging in a blind flight. And first of all, you don't want to know what those are. That's a major ethical issue in the judging process if you did know what a beer was. So you shouldn't try to do that. But beyond that, it is a fool's errand. It is almost impossible to actually correctly guess what a beer is, even if you think you know what it is. In my years of judging, there has only ever been one time that I knew what a beer was, because the exact ingredients that were in there I knew had to be one specific thing. But beyond that, our memory is so fallible. If you take a beer, and this applies to any other kind of artisan food or drink as well, but if you take a beer that I've had more times than I can ever count, let's say Bell's Two Hearted Ale, classic Midwest IPA, I cannot begin to imagine how many of them I have had in my life. I know that beer very well. I promise you, if that showed up in front of me in a tasting, in a judging environment, I would not know it was Bell's Two Hearted Ale. There's too many other beers it's inspired. There's too many beers that are similar to it. So many things that would prevent me from knowing this beer that I actually have a lot of familiarity with. And when we remember a a tasting experience we've had in the past, our memories can warp that in ways that we aren't aware of. So if you taste a beer, and again, this applies to chocolate or anything else, and there's a subtle note of strawberry in there from the hops, and it stood out to you and it makes you love that beer. 6 months from now, when you remember drinking that, I promise you that note of strawberry is going to be more significant than it actually was when you tasted it. And if you go back to it again, you're going to be surprised that it is more subtle and you have to tease it out just like you did the first time. And our memories are just constantly holding on to some things and letting go of others. One thing we've talked about on Bean to Barstool from the very beginning is the importance and the value of tasting with people of different backgrounds and learning from their experiences, their vocabularies. Just the last full episode we had on Bean to Barstool, I was interviewing Joanne Mumbai, who does Beloved Pairings, and she was talking about tasting a craft chocolate bar. I had sent her several bars, and I believe this one was the Stranger's Chocolate Guatemala La Chua bar. And there was something in there that she recognized. She couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. And then finally she realized it was Jamaican black cake. And as we were talking during that episode, I was telling her that I had, no familiarity with this dessert. I've never had Jamaican black cake before. And so she was describing it and talking about why she was familiar with it. And that kind of experience of tasting with somebody who has had different experiences from you and has different flavor references can not only expand our ability as tasters, but can also help us better understand each other and each other's stories and our own stories and why we're familiar with certain flavors, why we take for granted that everybody would identify a particular aroma as being this particular thing, when in reality that is specific to our experience or to our culture, to our geography. There is so much power for empathy in the tasting experience when we do that with vulnerability and curiosity. And I was excited to get to do that a little bit with a group that I am typically just up in front of teaching, and being able to have more of a level experience with them was something I really enjoyed, and I'm hoping to get to do that with some other tasting groups that I work with in the near future. It was interesting. Early in that class, folks obviously can ask questions throughout the whole thing. And somebody asked, this really wasn't connected to anything that we were doing, but asked me what I thought about macro beer brands. Like, is there like a cheap mass produced lager that I like? And I think probably this person and maybe most of the class were expecting me to say, no, they're all trash. You should only ever be drinking craft beer. And obviously, yes, I want folks supporting local and independent brands. But one aspect of beer that is different from craft chocolate is that beer doesn't have the same ethical concerns around its ingredient sourcing and the people who are growing those ingredients. And so while there are obviously still considerations around corporate decisions and like what companies we support with our money, it's a different negotiation than we're making on the chocolate side. And I realized as I was answering this guy's question that the two most significant beer memories I had this year were around laid back macro lagers, where like the beer was not really the point of the moment. It was doing what beer does and being a companion to social interactions. Both of these memories came from our trip to Mexico in October when I was down there to judge Copa Cerveza. The very first night in Chihuahua, after we and the group of international judges had gone out to a sotoleria to taste some sotol, we came back into the city and we ended up at this open air food hall. We're sitting at picnic tables and people were taking turns going up and buying like armfuls of bottles of cheap Mexican lager, and we had like plastic cups, and it was ergonomically and aesthetically about like as counterproductive to a good tasting experience as it can be, but that wasn't the point. The point was sitting around with these people that we really liked, that we only see once a year, and telling stories and laughing. And as this beer was disappearing and people are getting looser, nobody was getting stupid, nobody was drunk, but like we were laughing, and there was so much camaraderie and joy. And it was my single favorite professional memory of the entire year. bookending the other end of the trip in Mexico City. Very last night we were there. We had just stepped out of the expo center where the big beer festival that goes along with the competition was going on, and it's super loud and crowded in there. And we go out onto the street corner. It's probably 8, 9 o'clock at night, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. It is our last night in the second largest city in the Western Hemisphere. Like, we could do whatever we wanted. We could hop in an Uber, we could go somewhere, we could just go back to the hotel and be lame and go to sleep before our flight the next day. We could try to find something in the neighborhood. We could see what other folks were doing. And what we ended up doing was going into a corner 7-Eleven and grabbing some macro lager and some bags of potato chips. And then we went back to our hotel and found our way out onto the roof. And we spent the next several hours watching the city and drinking beer and snacking on chips and telling stories from the week and just reflecting back on it. And it was the perfect way to end the trip. Both of those memories, the beer wasn't the point, but the beer was there as part of it. And all of my other favorite memories from the year around beer are around beers that have been in my life for years. Nothing new, nothing exotic. Drinking goblets of Degar Triple at Hopleaf on their back patio late one night in August, sipping Edmund Fitzgerald Porter around the fireplace at a cabin in the Upper Peninsula when we went up there last month for the 50th anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, having beers in the tap rooms of breweries owned by friends of mine, Southridge Brewing in Wilmington, Fifth Street Brew Pub in Dayton, Gravel Road Brewing in Middletown. Breweries that are trying to genuinely be a part of their community and are brewing approachable beer that is just supposed to fuel conversation. And those are the things that I remember from this year. They aren't weird beers that I dissected and just had like kind of molecular tasting experiences with. I love doing that, but that wasn't what stood out to me this year.
We'll be right back.
Thinking of crafting a new beer, or maybe giving your next small batch a flavor twist? Let's talk bold flavors, exotic origins, and ingredients you can truly trust. Cocoa Supply brings you premium cacao nibs, husks, and pulp straight from small farms in Ecuador. No middlemen, just pure craft potential. Roast nibs into a rich stout, swirl cacao pulp into a tangy sour, or add earthy, woody notes with cacao husks. Every ingredient adds layers of flavor, aroma, and story. Ethically sourced, top quality, and delivered with care. Brewers, roasters, and chocolate makers worldwide rely on Cocoa Supply. What are you waiting for? Visit cocosupply.com and start brewing with intention. All right, let's take a look back at my favorite chocolate bars that I had in 2025. And I want to give a couple caveats at the outset here. First of all, this is a list of favorites, not necessarily a list of best. I think these are all great bars, but I don't want to give the impression that these are my labored over awards that I'm giving out. These are bars that I had a response to that I really enjoyed, and I want to make it clear this is abundantly subjective and not necessarily objective in some sort of judging standpoint. And second, this list is about half a dozen bars long. I'm not sure that that is an exhaustive list. I'm sure I could go back and fill out a list of 10 or 20 or more. Again, these are bars that, as I'm going back through my tasting notes for the year, stand out to me as bars that are memorable, bars that I know I really loved and responded to in the moment. So just because a bar is not on this list doesn't mean I did not love it. All right, I'm going to start out with some single origin bars. The first one is the most recent from this list. This is from Manada Chocolateria, out of Mexico. It is a 75% bar. I do not have a specific origin within Mexico. This was a new maker to me. I picked up this bar when we were in Mexico City back in October and tasted it just a couple weeks ago. It was snowing outside, and I think there is a particular value to tasting a bar like this in the Northern Hemisphere during the winter because it is so warm and bright. The aroma had some very light cinnamon notes to it. Wasn't overly expressive, but then it opened up so brightly on the palate. It is fruity and bold and acidic and sunny. You get this juicy red berry. It's not a tremendously complicated bar, but tasting it as the snow was falling outside was just this like pop of color, and really loved it. The next one is from a maker you're probably all tired of hearing me talk about. This is Stranger's Chocolate out of Ukraine. I have talked about them a lot in the last couple years, them and Sisters A. You're going to hear from Sisters A again here in just a moment because both of them produced bars this year that were just incredible. From Stranger, I've got their Madagascar Samburano Valley 70% bar, and this is just a pure distillation of what we think of when we think of Madagascar chocolate. It is acidic and bright, and you get like tart and red and blue berries. There is some like roast that kind of vies with the acidity on the palate, but their characteristic creamy melt just kind of brings those together, doesn't make them clash with each other. You get little flits of peach and berries. This is just an absolutely gorgeous bar, and one that I would hand to anyone if I wanted to kind of give a proof of concept for why Madagascar can be such an exciting origin. And also from Stranger, their Ecuador Palo Santo 74% bar. You get these notes of strawberry and raspberry and cream, but it also has this regal roast that those kind of splash against. There is a touch of acidity. This is so good. No joke. I seriously almost cried when I tasted this bar. I was having a rough day and it was just exactly what I needed. And sometimes that's what makes a chocolate or a beer or anything else stand out to us, is how the space we're in emotionally in the moment when we are tasting it. And that's why I said at the outset here, this is not a list of the definitive best bars. These are the bars that I had an experience with and a response to. Finally, the last single origin bar. This is from Chocolate Cafe in Rushville, Indiana. Dustin Cornett runs this. He also is the primary organizer for the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival. And this bar is sort of a concept bar that he trialed earlier this year with cacao from Kimu Farms in Liberia. If you read the Bean to Barstool blog, I did an article earlier this year on Kimu Farms. Really cool story behind what they're doing there, and I'm hoping to see more availability for their cacao for makers here in the U.S. in the coming years. But for now, Otis and his family sent over some cacao from the farm to Dustin, and he made a small run of these bars that I got to taste. This bar was just absolutely delicious. The aromas were very warm and approachable, but still nuanced. You got like gentle baking spices, toasted brioche, cashew butter, really pleasant balance of sweetness and roast on the palate. One of the things that made me excited about this, beyond just the amazing story behind it and the fact that the bar is delicious, is that the tasting notes I got here made this a really attractive origin for brewers in my mind. We don't have time here to get into all of the different reasons that we select different roasts for brewing with cacao, but this, I think, would provide some nuanced flavor without providing any of the pain points that some of the more expressive origins can in a brewing format. So I'm hoping if this cacao becomes available or more widely available, that I can talk a brewer into working with this and seeing what it tastes like in a beer. All right, finally, let's talk about two inclusion bars that I really loved this year. Now, again, there were a ton of inclusion bars I loved this year. These are just two that I want to highlight real quickly. First is from Violet Sky, another Indiana maker. We've had Hans, their owner, on the show in the past. And I want to talk about their Mezcal infused 77% Haiti bar. If you were at the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival, I had this for sale at our booth and also used it in the tasting that I led at the festival. Hans was trialing this bar. He made a very small batch and gave us pretty much all of the bars to sell at the festival. I'm hoping that he does it again because it is an awesome bar. It was really popular during the tasting that I led, and it sold out at our booth. So we need more of them, Hans. This is like I said, a 77% Haiti Pizza bar. The cacao nibs are soaked in mezcal from Los Nahuales Nahual de Coyote, and you get such a like clear and bright and sunny presentation of the mezcal in here. It is lightly fruity. You almost get like a juniper like note. There are little flits of grapefruit and pine. It is round and full and bright. I am seeing a lot more mezcal infused bars in the last year, which I'm really excited for, not just for the cultural storytelling opportunity there, but also because it's an interesting way to get smoke flavors into a bar instead of just using smoked cacao, which presents a little bit more of a challenge for some makers. Really cool flavors, way that you can balance and contrast things when you're working with mezcal, similar to like if you're working with a peated scotch, but I think actually mezcal works a little bit better. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot more of those bars. I expect to continue to see more of them in 2026. Had several good ones this year. This one might have been my single favorite, although all of them had a little bit different expression, so it's most fun to just taste them side by side. And then the last bar I'll talk about is from my friends at Sisters A in Ukraine. This is their strawberries and basil 50% bar. They work with inclusions in just such an incredibly thoughtful way, and every single inclusion concept that they come up with just seems to have a clear identity and is both it meets expectations but then is also surprising in some way. This one starts out like earthy and green. You get unripe strawberries. You get the impression of like cool shade and spring grass under your feet. You get a little bit of like green garden herbs coming through from the basil. This is a bar I wrote down in my original tasting notes that this is a bar that has its fingers in the soil. It tastes like spring. It feels like spring. It was just absolutely delightful. If you have the chance to get Sisters A chocolate, please do so. I know Chocolate Squirrel is carrying them, and my friend London at Peace on Fifth has them, and Stranger both. So definitely seek those out. They are two of my absolute favorite makers in the world right now. When I was leading the class at the library that I mentioned earlier, talking about the why of tasting and the purpose of tasting instead of just the process, one of the things that I was talking about with them was that with all of my formal training in tasting beer, both as a beer judge, becoming an advanced Cicerone, learning how to recognize off flavors, all of the things that go into becoming like a vetted taster, it can feel sometimes, if you're not maintaining the reason for why you're doing this, like I'm teaching myself how to not like beer. You know, in a judging setting, so much of the focus is on figuring out what's wrong with every single sample that's in front of you. And when you're sitting for an exam, you know, you're focused on differentiating different styles. So you're fitting everything into boxes and learning the rules around them, and you're learning to recognize off flavors, and it sometimes can strip some of that joy away. And it's a necessary process if you're wanting to become a better taster, but it can be difficult, especially if you are in a busy professional environment, to remember why you got into this and why this ever sparked joy for you. And it is important for me to remember, and I think I got away from it a little bit this year, how much curiosity and delight needs to play into our enjoyment of beer and chocolate or whatever other foods and drinks we enjoy. Our senses are the only way that we interact with the world around us. Whatever you believe we are as humans, whether you have religious or spiritual beliefs, or you just think that we are amazingly intelligent animals with really powerful computers in our heads, or anywhere in between those things, whatever it is we are, our only way to interface with the world is through our five senses. Everything we learn is through them. Every point of connection with another human being is through those. And I think it is just incredible that with everything that happens in our heads, everything that happens in our emotions, the only way it interfaces with the physical world is through these five senses. And our chemical senses of smell and taste in particular are such powerful conduits for connection, for engaging emotion and memory and imagination. And for everything that we learn about tasting, and the science is amazing. And every bit of work we put into becoming a more accomplished taster for professional reasons, we can never lose sight of the fact that getting to enjoy food and beverage with our senses is a gift, and it is a delight, and we need to follow our curiosity through that, balancing our learning formally with our experiences. And that is something I definitely want to do more of in 2026. Thank you all so much for listening today. Thank you all for listening this year and for listening for the last several years to Bean to Barstool. I'm excited for 2026. I hope you all have a great holiday season and end to the year and a peaceful beginning to the new year. I'll see you all soon. Cheers.